Good? Okay, so hello everybody. Great to be in Paris this year. So today let's talk a little bit about, from the on-chain data perspective, what we can derive in terms of how all those protocols and products are being used, how the tokens unlock, and at the end of the day, what the unit economics of those projects are. So first, obviously a quick disclaimer, but also I'd like to acknowledge the work of the team. That was supposed to be a little French flag emoji, but we'll leave it for now. So about us. So I'm Sacha, Director of BD and Strategy at the TIE. We're an institutional service provider where we provide information services, so think data. We collect together tons of very different data sets on social media, to news, to market data, to on-chain data, and as we'll see, a lot of usage data. So in this presentation, I'd like to focus really on the usage data that we have on all those DeFi protocols, as well as a very unique data set that I'll spend most of the time actually on, which is our token unlock data set. So those are what I call the 3 U's of alternative on-chain data. Unit economics. How do protocols, in a sense, derive value? Usage. How are people using those products? And unlocks, finally, which is a very important piece of the economics of those projects, which is you receive tokens from this project. How do they vest and unlock over time? And can we track this? Does that have an impact on the market? So let's start with the unit economics. So most of the DeFi space is very early stage projects. So as such, you can think about them very much in VC terms as it's a startup. That startup needs to invest in order to capture clients and customers. That's the cost of customer acquisition. And from that, they will, over the lifetime of their interactions with those customers, they will get some value out of it, which is called the lifetime value. And that's a very open question, by the way, on where you set the boundaries, and without getting into securities laws and what you define as enterprise, that can also be thought about in the context of building public goods. Because at the end of the day, you're going to invest in getting users, and you're going to get some kind of value capture associated with that value creation that you provide to your users. So you need to think about what that lifetime value to cost of customer acquisition ratio is. And obviously, needless to say that if it's 1, already you're losing money because you have all your expenses and COGS, et cetera. So it really needs to be above 1, ideally 3 and 5, between 3 and 5, so that you can have something that's sustainable. But how can you derive an idea of what your unit economics are from the on-chain data? Well, we'll get a bit later into the usage part, but that's a bit different, right? What is the cost of customer acquisition? So one very neat example is, let's say you have a layer 1 blockchain that does a series of NFT drops to engage people more and get new users on their blockchain. What we can do is we can go through all the events and look what the average impact on the number of users on that blockchain is. And if you look here, the 0 is the day of the airdrop, and you can see pre and post what the average impact on the daily users on the blockchain is. And so if you want to know, you know how many millions of dollars you spent to do that NFT drop and do that collaboration with that F1 team. And now you can look at, on average, how much did the drop increase the usage, the number of users that you add every day. You multiply this by the number of days it lasts for, and you can have an idea of how much you paid for each user that you got on chain. The other thing the other component is the lifetime value. For this, you need to understand how much value accrues from having that customer on board. So here we're looking at Uniswap V2 and V3 aggregate fees on Ethereum with a 7-day moving average. And this is pretty easy to do, but still it's surprising how disparate those calculations are across the crypto space. And so here what you can see is right after the FTX collapse, a lot of people rushed to Uniswap, and so you see a sharp increase in fees. And another hint at looking at this more from a valuation perspective is what multiples are those projects trading at, and for this you can look at the market cap divided by the amount of fees that are being brought in by those customers. And so if you look at here, if you look back in 2021, you have very high multiples, and if you get closer to nowadays, you're much closer to the 10x SaaS multiple revenue. So let's jump into usage, because that part is actually pretty interesting, and you'll see that there is a lot more things that you can see into the on-chain data than one often could think. So things that you want to answer is, well, you have users use your own product. You need to know how they're using it, when are they using it, what are they using it for, right? Who are they using it with? What other products they might be using, right? Why do they like your product more? And not just from the perspective of, well, my product is differentiated from X, Y, and Z products because I built it this way. But really, how does that translate in the way people actually use your product? And what's really neat and nice with on-chain data is, well, now you can have a lot of insights into your competitors' products as well. So this is what you'll see here. For a little thing on this chart, it's basically a retention analysis on the Uniswap users. So you start here, and so for all the users that start on this month, here, you can see at the end of month 1 how many users were still active, month 2, month 3, month 4, etc. So what you see is a year later, only 4 or 5% of the users were still active. And you can do this. And by the way, on a lot of NFT projects and drops and things like that, what you see is actually even a couple months later, that number is actually 0%. So how are you retaining your users? That's a key question when you build a product. Another interesting thing is you can really go down deeply into how users use your products. So this is the median duration for which people, you can derive from this the median duration for which people provide liquidity on Uniswap. So basically, you're an LP provider on Uniswap. How long do you provide that liquidity for before you withdraw it? And that's really important, if you're Uniswap, to really understand that very clearly. But also, let's say you want to build a product that's tangential to Uniswap, or you're a fund, or how do you understand really how other people behave and maybe rethink the ways you use those products? Another thing you might want to look at is how wealthy are your users, right? You know how much you're getting from your users, but what's the average distribution? Maybe one day we'll see projects and protocol that will actually have some kind of fees that depend on some kind of measure of user wealth. Because if you want to have public goods or things that are useful to people, sometimes it makes sense to have people who can afford it to pay a little bit more, and people who cannot afford it to be subsidized to some extent. Where it gets really interesting is because you have all the cross-connects between what smart contracts, those addresses use, you can look at the overlap of users between different projects and protocols. So here what we're looking at is the overlap and bear in mind, these are log plots. So if you look this in a linear scale, sushi would be completely out of the chart. And what this allows you to do is to basically see who are your comparables, right? What are projects that you have most similarity with? And obviously, this makes a lot of sense, right? You have QuickSwap, Aave, Crypto.com, very trading-focused projects. So if we zoom in on sushi, now, if you're Uniswap, how does your user retention, right? Having sticky users is very important. How does that compare to sushi? Well, long story short, Uniswap is doing better. And when are your users actually using your product? Turns out it's actually pretty similar. And you can see a big start of the activity around 9 a.m. Paris time, then the overlap between European and US hours, and big spike of activity a little bit after 9 a.m. New York City time. You can also look at the number of users you have over time, and you see that the V3 release of Uniswap coincided with a huge increase in activity, so there was supposedly a great launch. You can even go further and do some categorizations of the wallets, right? And you want to do user segmentation. So who is using your product and when are they using it? And I'll skip a little bit to the unlock section because there's quite a few interesting things about it. But you can also look at, when are people depositing on Uniswap versus withdrawing, maybe as a way of having an idea of what the market health is. So let's move on to, I think, the most interesting part of this talk, unlocks. There's very little transparency on unlocks of how the tokens are unlocked. Each project, each chain have a different process for that. They have a different ways of doing vesting. Some of them, they'll say that the token vest monthly, but if you actually look at the smart contract, they vest every 30 days. So if you look way into the future, well, that starts really piling up. There are so many other things. Sometimes also a project will say in the white paper, the unlock will start at that date, and then in the execution, actually the smart contract was pushed out either a little bit too early or a little bit too late, right? So these are discrepancies that can be quite important. So we went and literally put analysts full-time going through every white paper, going through every piece of public information that they could find, even when there were dApp, reaching out to the teams, to the foundations to try and understand where the gaps were, what was the most accurate representation of those unlocks. And then you have to do some approximations as well, because in a lot of cases, you can have definitions in terms of number of blocks. So we do a daily approximation of when the unlock is going to occur. And all this study that I'm going to show you is based on that huge data set of 350,000 plus unlock events. And these go back all the way to 2016 as far into the future, maybe 2100, or like whenever those tokens end their unlocks. But for this, we'll focus on June 2021 to June of this year. So what does it look in terms of price? So you normalize the price around the price at the time of the unlock. So 1 is going to be the price at the time of the unlock. And you look at trajectories of that price around. So it's really hard to see here. So you'll see we'll maybe have the need to go into some statistics about this. But this is what it looks like. Now, if you look at the volumes, you need to plot this in log because you have huge spikes. They're very volatile. And you have huge spikes of activity for some of those projects. Well, actually, how do those how are they distributed? And what you see here is actually it looks like a parallel. So if I'm doing the exact same chart of the distribution of the volumes in terms of daily traded volume, this is a very common way of measuring the liquidity of an asset. You see that they're actually parallels, right? So when you see in the log plot, it really behaves like a straight line. And so for this study, another big challenge has been getting good, accurate prices because, especially for tokens that are very thinly traded, having a robust price is actually challenging. So here, for example, we'll just cut it off at 100 times daily volume, which is already huge. So this is where you get into the different types and sizes of unlocks. So what happens when you have tiny little unlocks, small unlocks that happen maybe sometimes every day? Well, you get something like this on average. So the price decreases ahead of the unlock, and after the unlock rebounds, but not after a month, not quite exactly to the original price. So you'd think when you do a lot more, when you have a much bigger unlock, that would impact the price a lot more. And it does, but what's actually surprising is you get that sort of very complex structure. And it might not be statistically significant, but this looks like something like this. A narrative around this could be, you get ahead of the unlock, the price that decreases, then people see that the price there wasn't so much sell pressure or something, And so the price rebounds, but then token holders actually really start getting their tokens and maybe start putting them on the market, and so it goes down, and then they're done selling and it goes back up again. That could be one potential narrative. And so if you look by different size, so overall, this is the green line, this is what happens on average. For small tokens, right, you see sort of an overcorrection around the unlock, and then it recovers. And for the large tokens, you get this sort of complex shape. And in terms of volumes, obviously, small tokens, you get more impact on the trading volume, and large tokens, larger impact. Medians behave completely differently. So we don't have to get time to get too much into this for another time, but medians behave completely differently. Then another very interesting fact is, depending on the type of unlock that you have, you're going to have a different behavior. And so here we classify them by allocation, investment, emissions, liquidity mining. We have a few other types. But here, the allocation type is going to be foundation unlocks, developers, advisors, communities. And you see that those actually impact the price less. And they also impact the volumes less. Whereas all the rewards, staking, community rewards, those impact the price a lot more, and also the volumes. So it's interesting, right? You might think this as foundations, advisors are more long-term actors, long-term oriented, whereas all the small rewards, people just dump them because they're more short-term oriented. So that's it. Basically, just to give you an idea of what can be done with on-chain data to really profoundly understand how users use these protocols. Obviously, for builders to make better products, how value is not only created, but also captured in what it looks like, and should you do an F1 sponsorship or not? Because how much at the end of the day are you getting in terms of new activity and lifetime value? And that brings unprecedented ways for people to learn about not only their product, but their competitors' product and comparable products. And on the token unlocks, more to come. This is a very preliminary study, but you can see that there is different impact on the market based on the type of unlock, and most importantly, of course, and it's quite intuitive, the size. So I leave it there. And one other mention on unlocks, there's a huge need for a lot more transparency and disclosures on how those vesting unlocks happen, when, where, and having a much clearer way of getting that information. Thank you very much, and I'll open for questions.